The legend of Human's galaxy was vast, filled with planets, civilizations, and countless stars. But there was one story that echoed across every corner of space. It was a story that had been told for centuries, passed down from generation to generation. It wasn't about a species that still existed, it was about a species that had vanished. Or so everyone thought. The humans. To every other species in the galaxy, humans were nothing more than a myth. Ancient legends told of their power, their ingenuity, and their strength. But the stories were dismissed as tales from a time long past. After all, how could such a powerful race, capable of conquering entire worlds, simply disappear without a trace? It made no sense. Some species even believed that the humans were nothing more than a fairy tale, invented to inspire the younger generations. The galaxy moved on, its inhabitants forgetting the old myths. The great warlords, the fleets of the conquerors, the technologically advanced species, these were the real powers in the universe. Everyone knew that humans were nothing but a whisper in the dark, a story told by ancient civilizations to give meaning to their own existence. The humans were long gone, their ships lost in the dark void of space, their wars only remembered by a few historians who still clung to the old tales. But the universe, as it always does, was about to change. Far away in the forgotten corners of space, where even the most advanced species dared not tread, something stirred, a signal. It was faint at first, almost like an echo of something long forgotten. It was older than the most ancient of alien civilizations. And yet, it was unmistakably human. The signal was a relic from another time. It carried the faint traces of a species that had once roamed the stars with unimaginable power. The legends were true, but no one could have known how true they were. Humans had not disappeared, they had been waiting for the right moment to return. The first species to hear the signal didn't believe it at first. After all, they had seen the old myths and dismissed them. They had laughed at the idea of the humans returning. They assumed it was just another anomaly, perhaps a remnant of some long-dead civilization. But that laugh would soon die in their throats. One by one, the other species began to hear the signal. Each dismissed it in their own way, each putting it out of their minds as an impossible possibility. But it was there, growing louder, clearer, until it could no longer be ignored. Then, one fateful day, it happened. The first fleet appeared. It was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Huge ships, massive in size and design, slipped through the fabric of space like shadows, appearing out of nowhere. These weren't the ships of the legends. They were something far more advanced, something from another time entirely. They moved with precision and speed, their weapons glowing with an energy that no one could identify. At first, the galaxy watched in silence. Could this be real? Could the humans, those myths, those legends actually be back? It seemed impossible. Yet the ships were there, moving across the stars with an authority that no one could deny. Then, without warning, the first shot was fired. A single beam of energy that cut through space like a knife through the air. The enemy fleet, who had long controlled this part of the galaxy, never stood a chance. They tried to retaliate, firing everything they had. But their weapons bounced off the human ships as if they were nothing more than raindrops against a mountain. The first human fleet had arrived, and they were here to show the galaxy that the old myths were real. The enemy commanders scrambled, their ships scattering in all directions. But they were too slow. The humans were everywhere, their fleet appearing like shadows, striking with deadly accuracy. They didn't need numbers, they were a force unlike any other. A force that had been forgotten but was now reminding the galaxy of its strength. Across the stars, messages began to flood in from every corner of the galaxy. The humans had returned. Their fleets were here, and they weren't just a myth, they were a force to be reckoned with. The battle raged on, but it was clear that the humans were in control. They had been gone for centuries, but their power had only grown in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, the galaxy was about to learn what happens when the legends of old returned to life. The humans were no longer just a story, they were real, and their armada was unstoppable. The first striked galaxy had barely come to terms with the fact that the humans, those fabled legends of old, had returned. The myth had become reality, and it was nothing like anyone had ever expected. Across the stars, every species, every commander, and every fleet leader felt the tremors of uncertainty. The first fleet had appeared, and in its wake, a trail of destruction had followed. As the human ships moved through the void of space, their presence sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Their armada was vast, sleek, and organized, a well-oiled machine of war that none of the galaxy's greatest fleets had ever seen. They didn't just appear. They made their presence felt with every maneuver. Their ships didn't engage in senseless battle, they cut through the enemy like a blade, surgical and precise. The first target was an alien world long believed to be a bastion of the galaxy's most powerful military. Its defense fleets were ready, armed with some of the most advanced weaponry in existence. Their technology was a match for any force that had come before them, or so they thought. The human fleet appeared above the planet without warning, and the first shot came from their lead ship. It wasn't a traditional weapon. It was a burst of energy that tore through the air like a thunderclap. The enemy didn't even have time to react before their shields were shattered. The next wave of fire came swiftly, striking with deadly accuracy. Their defenses, once thought impenetrable, collapsed under the might of the human fleet's attack shields. Down to 10%, the enemy commander shouted as the battle began in earnest. His fleet had been caught off guard, unsure of how to respond to the power that now stood before them. Nothing in their extensive training prepared them for this. The humans didn't just use brute force, they were tactical, relentless, and surgical in every strike. The human fleet, moving as a single unstoppable unit, began its systematic destruction. Their ships glided through space with grace and speed, firing on all targets with deadly precision. The enemy ships, despite their size and strength, could not keep up with the human assault. In moments, entire fleets were reduced to debris. Floating in space like lifeless husks, "Return fire," the enemy admiral ordered, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. They had never encountered such force, such cold, calculating efficiency. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't show mercy. The battle became a one-sided massacre. But even as the enemy's ships fell, something strange began to happen. The humans didn't linger. They didn't chase down every fleeing ship or destroy every last vessel. No, their message had already been sent. The war was over before it even began. The enemy's survivors retreated, stunned, disoriented, and filled with disbelief. How could a species that had been written off as a myth possess such power? The human fleet, after decimating their forces, withdrew as quickly as they had arrived. There was no fanfare, no boasting, just quiet efficiency. As the last of the enemy forces fled, the commanders across the galaxy began to exchange frantic messages. What had just happened? How had the humans, those long-forgotten legends, returned with such a vengeance? They had only heard stories of humanity's great conquests, but nothing prepared them for what had just unfolded. The humans had not only shown their strength, they had redefined what it meant to be a power in the galaxy. On the human flagship, Commander Callan stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the chaos below. The battle was over, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. The first strike had been successful, but the true purpose of this war, this return of the humans, had yet to reveal itself. Status report, Callan said, his voice calm but sharp. As always, sir, the tactical officer replied. The enemy has retreated to the outer systems. Their forces are disorganized and they're pulling back. The battle was won in under an hour. Callan nodded, processing the information. The speed of the victory was expected, but it didn't make him feel satisfied. The galaxy didn't know the full truth yet. They hadn't seen what the humans were truly capable of. Prepare for the next phase, Callan ordered. We're not here for a single victory. This is just the beginning. The news spread quickly across the galaxy. The humans, those legendary creatures of myth, had returned. The stories were true, and the consequences of those stories were far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. As fleets across the galaxy regrouped and tried to figure out how to respond, a chilling realization began to spread. The humans had returned, not just to conquer, but to rule. The galaxy, once dominated by other species, was now facing a new, overwhelming power, and the human armada was only getting started. The realization the galaxy was still reeling from the shock of the human fleet's sudden appearance. Fleets that had once commanded respect and power were now cowering, retreating, trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. The humans, those long-dead legends, had not only returned, they had obliterated their first target with surgical precision, leaving no survivors and no room for mercy. But the truth was sinking in slowly, like a cold wave washing over the galaxy's leaders. They had made a grave mistake in dismissing humans as myths. Now, the cost of that mistake was becoming evident. No one knew how the humans had remained hidden for so long or what they had become in that time. All they knew now was that humanity was not only alive, it was stronger than anyone could have ever imagined. In the High Council chambers of the Galactic Union, the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered to discuss the unfolding crisis. Tensions were high as each leader tried to process the news in their own way. A species they thought extinct was back, and they were not here to negotiate. Are we sure about this? General Varric, the commander of the Krasl fleet, growled, his tone heavy with disbelief. Humans? That's a story, a myth. How could they have come back with such power? Ambassador Zella of the Vorta species leaned forward, her gaze sharp. The reports are clear. Varric, their ships are beyond anything we've seen. They're not just Using advanced weapons they've adapted in ways we can't even comprehend. They're not the humans we once knew, they've evolved, and I'm afraid they've evolved beyond us. The room fell silent as the weight of Zella's words sank in. The humans had always been unpredictable, driven by a fierce will to survive. They had survived wars, famine, and the collapse of their own homeworld, Earth, but now, it seemed they were not just survivors, they were conquerors. And their mission was clear: take what they believed was rightfully theirs. Are we just going to sit here and wait for them to come to us? General Varric spat, his hands clenched into fists. We should launch a counterattack. Rally our fleets, we can't let them take control without a fight. The problem is that we don't know who else they've become, Ambassador Zella said, her voice calm but filled with concern. We've been fighting each other for centuries. And now a force from the past is here, one that none of us can predict. I'm afraid we're too late to act as we once did. Then what are you suggesting, Zella? Varric snapped, we just let them take everything? Zella's eyes softened as she glanced around the room, meeting the gazes of her fellow leaders. We need to be smart, we need to understand what the humans want. If we fight them blindly, we will lose. But if we understand them, if we listen to what they've come to do, we might have a chance. The council members fell quiet, each lost in their thoughts. The humans' sudden return had forced them into a position none of them had prepared for. The power dynamics of the galaxy were shifting, and no one could predict what was coming next. Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, Commander Callan stood on the bridge, his gaze steady and focused as the Warzone stretched out before him. The latest battle had been a success, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the bigger picture. The humans hadn't come back to just fight in small skirmishes. They were here to claim the galaxy. Callan turned to his tactical officer, his voice calm but commanding. Report on the enemy fleet's movements. Sir, we've received intercepted transmissions. The Galactic Union has begun forming an alliance. Their fleets are moving to regroup. They're preparing for counteraction. Good, Callan said, his lips curving into a small, knowing smile. Let them come. We need them to come. We need them to realize that they're not in control anymore. The officer hesitated. Sir, if they continue to regroup, they will. Callan interrupted, his voice full of certainty. And when they do, we'll be ready. Our plan was always bigger than just this war. The galaxy will see that the humans are back, and we will take our place among the stars. He paused, looking out into the vastness of space. The Armada was vast, its ships lined up in perfect formation, ready to move at a moment's notice. We've been forgotten long enough, Callan muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. It's time to remind them who we are back. In the Galactic Union's High Council, Zella had a new sense of urgency. The galaxy's powers had dismissed the humans as myth for too long. They had underestimated them, and now that the humans had returned, the balance of power was no longer in their hands. She stood up, her decision made. We need to meet them, not as enemies, but as equals. This fight is not one we can win by force alone. If we stand a chance, we must find a way to understand them. But even as she spoke, a small voice of doubt echoed in her mind. Could the galaxy truly understand the humans after all? They weren't just a myth, they were something far more dangerous. The legends were true, and now the galaxy was going to feel the full weight of that truth. As the human ships prepared to move forward, Callan's thoughts were clear. The time had come. The myth of humanity had become a reality, and the galaxy was about to see what happened when legends were given power. No more hiding. No more fear. Humanity was back, and they were ready to take the stars. Asters, the tide turns. The galaxy was in turmoil. For centuries, the balance of power had remained steady. The strongest factions ruled, their forces kept in check by carefully established alliances and power structures, but all of that had been upended in an instant. The humans, those mythical figures of old, had returned with a force that no one could have anticipated. And now, the galaxy was caught in the grip of their rising tide. The first wave of human attacks had sent shockwaves throughout the stars. Entire fleets had been decimated in the blink of an eye, and the remaining forces were scrambling to regroup. The galaxy's greatest military powers, once thought invincible, were now facing a reality they couldn't understand. As the human fleet pressed forward, taking system after system with terrifying precision, an urgent call went out from the Galactic Union. It wasn't just a plea for help, it was a desperate request for an emergency council meeting. The threat was real. The humans weren't just here to conquer, they were here to reshape the galaxy. The meeting room was tense as leaders from across the galaxy took their seats. The council chamber, once a place of diplomacy and negotiation, now felt like the last refuge of a dying era. The humans had disrupted the natural order, and no one knew what would come next. Everyone thought the humans were nothing more than a fable, said General Varric of the Krasl fleet, his voice grim. Now, we've learned the hard way. Their power is real, and it's unlike anything we've seen before. Ambassador Zella of the Vorta species, who had once tried to bring calm to the council, now stood in front of them, her posture tense. She had seen firsthand the strength of the human armada, and she knew that the galaxy had underestimated them completely. "We can no longer pretend they are just an anomaly," she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "The humans have returned with a purpose. They've shown us that they will not stop until they reclaim their place in the galaxy. We need to stop them," Varric snapped. "We can't allow one species to disrupt everything we've worked for." Zella shook her head. "It's not that simple. They're not just fighting for dominance, they're fighting for survival. They've been left to their own devices for too long, forgotten by the galaxy. We can't defeat them with sheer power alone." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. The humans weren't just an invading force, they were a force born of necessity. And if the galaxy didn't find a way to understand them, they would be swept aside like every other power that had once ruled. But General Varric was relentless. "What are you suggesting, then, that we just let them take over? We need to strike while they're still vulnerable. We can unite our fleets. Launch a massive counterattack before they grow too powerful." Zella looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "And what happens after that? You think we can defeat them in one battle? The humans have a strength we can't even begin to understand. They've already adapted to everything we've thrown at them, they've learned, and they've evolved." Another leader, Admiral Ran of the Syrixan fleet, spoke up. "We could send a diplomatic envoy. If we can't fight them directly, maybe we can talk to them. Reach some kind of agreement." Zella's eyes narrowed. "We tried diplomacy with the humans before. The old ways didn't work. The humans don't want negotiations, they want their place in the galaxy, and they'll take it by force if necessary. We need to send a message." "Then," said Varric, slamming his fist onto the table, "we need to remind them that we won't be pushed aside, or we need to learn to work with them." Zella countered. "Because if we don't, we'll all be swept aside, and I don't think any of us are ready for that." Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, Commander Callan stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The galaxy was in chaos, and he knew it was only a matter of time before every power in the galaxy would try to stop them. But Callan wasn't concerned. The human fleet was stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and their mission was clear. "Report," Callan said, his voice unwavering. "The enemy has begun to regroup." "Commander," the tactical officer replied. "But they're still scattered. We're moving through their defenses faster than expected." Callan nodded. "Good. We don't stop. We press forward relentlessly. We've waited long enough to take what's ours." His eyes narrowed as he watched the stars shimmer before him. Humanity had been forgotten, pushed aside by the galaxy's older powers, but now they were back, and they were going to remind everyone what it meant to be human. "The galaxy will learn one thing, and one thing only." Callan muttered to himself, his voice low but filled with conviction. "Humans are not myths, we are the future." As the human fleet moved forward, it wasn't just about defeating the enemies in front of them, it was about establishing a new order. The old powers would either submit or fall, but the humans would no longer be overlooked. Their return was not a fluke, it was a reclamation of what was rightfully theirs. And as the enemy regrouped, gathering their forces to launch their counterattack, the humans prepared for the next phase of their plan. A full-scale assault on the heart of the galaxy. The tide had turned, and there was no going back. The unseen thread galaxy's eyes were on the humans, their ships moving through space like unstoppable forces of nature. The enemy alliances were scrambling to regroup, sending out desperate calls for reinforcements. The humans had shattered their fleets, obliterated their defenses, and now they were pushing forward with the relentless precision of a storm. But in the wake of humanity's resurgence, something darker and far more ancient began to stir. It wasn't a force the humans could see, nor one they had even prepared for. It had remained hidden for centuries, buried deep in the shadowed corners of the galaxy, waiting for its moment to reveal itself. At first, it was nothing more than whispers, faint disturbances in the cosmic fabric, strange signals that flickered across the galaxy's most remote sectors. But as the human fleet continued to press forward, these whispers grew louder, more defined. It wasn't just a disturbance anymore, it was a warning. The first fleet to feel the tremors was the Zix Collective, a race of ancient and highly intelligent beings that had long studied the unknown. They had lived in the shadows for millennia, gathering knowledge and power from the most remote corners of space. They were, for all intents and purposes, masters of the unseen. They had known that something was coming. The humans were only the first sign. The second, however, was far more terrifying. "Captain Zara," an officer called from the tactical station. "We're receiving strange interference from the dark zones. It's unlike anything we've encountered. The signature is alien, and yet, I know," Zara replied, her voice laced with concern. "We've been expecting this. The humans may be the beginning But this is something much worse. The galaxy has stirred too many ancient forces. Zara's gaze was fixed on the distant stars, her mind racing. The humans' return had been a catalyst, but they were not the true danger. The forces that had slumbered for centuries, watching from the periphery, were now awake and they were coming. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship of the human fleet, Commander Callan had no idea of the new threat emerging from the shadows. His focus was on the immediate battle. The galaxy's remaining powers were in disarray, and humanity's dominance was becoming undeniable. The enemy forces, once proud and strong, were now retreating in fear. And the humans weren't stopping. "We've gained control of 2 more systems, Commander," the tactical officer reported. "Their defensive fleets are barely holding together. The enemy is losing ground faster than we anticipated." "Keep pushing," Callan commanded, his voice calm and collected, though beneath the surface a sense of unease lingered. Something about the way the battle was progressing didn't sit right with him. The victory was almost too easy, but before he could process his thoughts, a loud alarm blared throughout the bridge, its shrill sound cutting through the tension. The ship's screens flickered, displaying an incoming message. It wasn't from the enemy. Instead, it was an encrypted transmission, a strange one, pulsing with a dark energy that sent a chill through the crew. Callan's eyes narrowed open. He ordered. The transmission crackled and a distorted figure appeared on the screen. It was humanoid, but its features were obscured by shadows, an aura of ancient power radiating from its form. "Humanity," the voice said, low and gravelly, "you have awakened the wrong forces. The time of your reign is fleeting. The true rulers of the galaxy have returned, and you will bow before them." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. Callan stood motionless, his mind racing. What had he just heard? Who had sent that message? And why did it feel so familiar? His instincts told him that this was no idle threat. Something larger than the human fleet was out there, and it was moving toward them. "Prepare the fleet for any possibility," Callan ordered, his tone firm. "We have to be ready for whatever comes next." The mysterious transmission spread like wildfire through the galaxy's intelligence networks. Several factions received it, each interpreting it in their own way. The Galactic Union, still reeling from the humans' surprise appearance, scrambled to make sense of what had just occurred. Were these forces truly real? Or had someone been playing mind games with the humans to throw them off balance? The truth was far worse than anyone could have imagined. In the dark, forgotten corners of the galaxy where no one dared venture, something ancient and powerful stirred. The humans had not just awakened a sleeping giant, they had disturbed something much darker. The true rulers of the galaxy, a force older than the stars themselves, were now making their move. And they were not interested in coexistence. Back on the human flagship, Commander Callan had no time to waste. The transmission was only the first sign of the coming storm. The fleet had already dealt with overwhelming threats, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for territory or power, it was a fight for survival. "We have to stay focused," Callan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We've beaten the odds before, but we can't ignore this." The human fleet, once seen as just a myth, had proven its might. They had crushed their enemies with incredible force. But the message was clear: the galaxy was no longer their only battlefield. There were greater threats, lurking in the dark, waiting to make their move. And humanity would have to face them head-on. The hidden empires. The days passed. The human fleet moved ever forward, capturing system after system, sending shockwaves through the galaxy. The once invincible fleets of the old powers scattered, retreating to the farthest corners of space. Humanity had taken the first step toward dominance, but a deeper, more ominous force loomed ahead, one that no one could fully comprehend yet. Despite their success, Commander Callan could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing down on him. The mysterious transmission, the ominous warning from the shadowy figure, refused to leave his mind. Who were these ancient beings, and why had they waited until now to reveal themselves? What did they want, and how did they know the humans were coming? The human armada pressed on, its momentum seemingly unstoppable. Yet the deeper they pushed into the galaxy's heart, the more the tension grew. Something was shifting in the fabric of the universe, something the humans weren't prepared for. On the farthest edge of the galaxy, in a forgotten corner of the stars, something stirred. The Zix Collective, those ancient beings who had studied the galaxies for eons, now found themselves staring into the void with growing dread. They had watched the humans for generations, believed them nothing more than ancient ghosts. But now they realized the truth. The humans were a force not to be ignored. Admiral Jarek, an officer, called. Breaking the silence in the Zix command center, "The humans have breached the 4th sector. They've bypassed every defense, dismantled every fleet in their path. Their reach is growing too fast. Our networks are beginning to feel unstable." Jarek, The leader of the Zix collective stood silently, his mind racing. We thought the humans were myths, he muttered to himself, but now, they are real. And they're stronger than we ever imagined. Jarek's mind turned to the ancient texts. The forbidden knowledge passed down from the oldest generations. There had been warnings. Buried deep within the archives, warnings of a force that would rise again, a force that would challenge the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The humans were just the spark, the harbingers of something far darker. They will not stop. Jarek finally spoke, his voice cold and resolute. We cannot face them alone. The time has come to wake the others. Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, Commander Callan was beginning to understand the enormity of the situation. The reports had been steady victory after victory, but still, something lingered. There was no joy in his triumphs, only an increasing sense of uncertainty. His fleet was powerful, but was it enough to face what was truly coming? Commander, we've intercepted another transmission, the communications officer reported, breaking Callan's chain of thought. This one is different. It's coming from the outer reaches of the galaxy. It's another warning from a different source this time. Callan's brow furrowed. Put it through. The transmission flickered to life, showing the same shadowy figure from before, but this time, the voice was different. It was ancient, filled with an eerie calm, as if it had existed long before the humans or their enemies had even thought to look up at the stars. Humans, the voice began, echoing with power. You have woken the sleeping ones, you have stirred the ancient empire, and now you will face the consequences. What you have unleashed is not within your control. The galaxy is not yours to command. Callan's heart raced. This was the second warning, but this time there was no fear, no desperation in the voice. It was filled with something far more unsettling: certainty. The galaxy wasn't just under threat from the humans' return, it was about to face something older, something far more dangerous than anything they had yet encountered. Who are you? Callan demanded, trying to keep his composure. What do you want? The voice paused for a moment, as if considering his question. We are the ones who have watched over this galaxy for eons. We are the architects of the stars, and you, humans, are but a small part of a much larger puzzle. Your victory was inevitable, yes, but your survival, your future, these are not certain. You will soon learn that you are not the only ones who have power. The galaxy will change and the balance will tip in ways you cannot foresee. The transmission cut out, leaving Callan standing in stunned silence. This time, it wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of the human fleet's insignificance in the larger game of the galaxy. There were forces in motion far older, far more powerful, and they were watching across the galaxy. The signs were beginning to show. The ancient empire, long hidden in the shadows, had started to awaken. Jarek's call had been heard by the oldest and most powerful factions in the universe, and they had begun to move. The humans had never faced anything like this before. The galaxy had always been a place of power struggles, of wars and alliances, but now, the true rulers were showing themselves. These were not the old powers. These were the architects of the galaxy itself, beings that had shaped the stars, the very fabric of space and time itself. And they were not going to let humanity claim what they believed was theirs. Back aboard the human flagship, Commander Callan stood with a heavy heart, staring out into the infinite darkness. The galaxy had never been this uncertain. The humans had arrived with unstoppable force, their fleet unmatched, but now, there was something far greater to fear than the enemy fleets they had already destroyed. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future against an enemy that was as old as the stars themselves, and the worst part? They didn't even know if they were strong enough to win. The final reckoning. Galaxy's horizon, once peaceful and stable, was now a battleground of cosmic proportions. The humans had come, and their arrival had sparked chaos both for the galaxy's established powers and for the ancient forces that had slumbered for eons. As Commander Callan stood at the helm of the human flagship, he could feel the weight of the coming conflict bearing down on him. The enemy they faced was no longer just another species. It was something far older, far more dangerous. The true rulers of the galaxy had awakened. Report, Callan ordered, his voice firm but filled with uncertainty. The weight of the situation pressed on him, but he couldn't afford to let it show. They were about to enter unknown territory, and the fleet had to be ready for anything. Commander, we've received more transmissions from the outer systems, the communications officer replied, voice strained. The transmissions are older, more powerful. There's a pattern emerging. These messages, they're not coming from any civilization we know. They're cosmic in nature. Callan turned to the officer, his gaze cold and calculating. Meaning? They're coming from a place older than the stars themselves, the officer continued, looking up from the screen, and they seem to be sending a warning. They're not just telling us to leave, they're warning us that we're not prepared for what's coming. Callan's mind raced. The ancient empire had spoken of their power of their ability to control the galaxy's very foundation. Could this really be true? Had the humans unknowingly stepped into a battle that stretched across time itself? We've already moved too far. There's no turning back now, Callan muttered to himself. Prepare the fleet for full engagement. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the ancient empire began to make its move. Their ships, enormous beyond imagination, emerged from the dark void. They didn't just slip through space. They shifted through it, their forms altering the fabric of reality itself. These ships weren't bound by the same rules of physics that governed the universe. They were something else. Something ancient. The first sign of their arrival was a wave of energy, so intense that it distorted the light of distant stars. It was as if space itself was bending in their presence, a tangible reminder of their unimaginable power. The galaxy's defenders, already on edge from the humans' assault, now had a new enemy to face, one whose very existence seemed to defy understanding. The fleets that had once thought themselves the galaxy's rulers now stood at the precipice of destruction. Their weapons, powerful as they were, seemed like toys compared to the power of the ancient empire. No shields, no armor could withstand their might. They had been dormant for millennia, but now they were awake, and they were not here for a fight. They were here to reclaim what they believed was theirs, back on the human flagship. Callan's gaze was unyielding. His mind flashed back to the warning, the true rulers of the galaxy are awakening. But in that moment, something in him clicked. He had always known that humans would have to face challenges far beyond anything they had imagined, but he had also known that the human spirit was not easily broken. The galaxy's leaders had underestimated them. They thought humanity would be a fleeting force, just a blip on the radar of galactic power. But now, the humans were standing face to face with something far greater, and they were not backing down. Launch all ships, Callan commanded, his voice steady. We will fight with everything we have. We've been underestimated before. We will not let that happen again. The fleet began to move into position, its ships aligning in perfect formation. There was no hesitation in their ranks. The humans had come from nothing, from the ashes of a lost world, and they had fought for their place in the galaxy. Now, they were facing the ultimate test, and Callan knew that they would not lose. The battle began with a roar of energy that shook the very fabric of space. The ancient empire's ships moved in, warping reality around them as they descended upon the human fleet. The first exchange was immediate. The human ships fired their weapons with deadly accuracy, but their blasts merely glanced off the surfaces of the ancient ships. The sheer power of their enemy was overwhelming, unlike anything the humans had ever seen. But the humans weren't here to win with sheer firepower. They had something more, their unity. They had fought, survived, and thrived against impossible odds, and now, that same will to survive burned within every soldier, every captain, every person aboard the human armada. Focus all fire on their core ships, Callan barked, his mind working quickly. We don't need to take down every ship, we need to break their command. The human fleet shifted, adapting their strategies in real time. They attacked from multiple angles, flanking the ancient ships with surprising precision. But no matter how many shots they fired, no matter how many tactics they tried, the ancient fleet did not falter. It was as if they were beyond the reach of mere weapons. But then, something changed. In the depths of the battle, where the human fleet was facing its greatest challenge yet, Commander Callan noticed something. The energy fields around the ancient ships were fluctuating, just a slight imperfection in their power structure. It was a flaw, a crack in their seemingly invulnerable exterior. We've found a weakness, Callan said, his voice like ice. Target their power cores. If we hit them just right, we can break their defenses. The human fleet responded with a renewed sense of purpose. They concentrated their fire on the exact point Callan had identified, pushing through the overwhelming resistance. It wasn't easy. The ancient ships fought back, warping space to avoid every attack. But the humans had found their opening. One by one, the enormous ships began to falter. Their power began to drain, and their energy fields flickered. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, the humans saw the tiniest sliver of hope.